on, people? This morning I was listening to WBAP and this Hannah Cox came on. She had some good points about law enforcement. I thought I would share it and chime in on things that I agree and disagree with her on. Here we go.
WBAP, it's the morning news. This is Ernie in for Brian. The rest of the crew, Hal J. is with us as well. Anna Cox joining us from Fox News. Anna, welcome to WBAP.
Thanks for having me on.
You know, it was a deadly year for law enforcement. In fact, I think it was the deadliest year for law enforcement officers in history last.
Okay, so this Hannah Cox, I don't know who she's from. They said Fox News. She makes some good points about law enforcement, but there's some things that she fails to bring up.
Year.
That's right, but from COVID, if I'm not mistaken.
Because I know a number of officers lost their lives in the line of duty, but a lot of them because they're dealing with people who are sick and dealing with the just general public. A lot of them lost their lives due to COVID as well.
Yeah, I think that we need to actually start paying attention to what's going on in law enforcement.
Okay, so you notice they're saying a lot, and it's really bad, but there's no numbers.
A really interesting couple of years. I have an extensive background working in criminal justice reform, and so there's a lot that goes on beneath the surface. There's a lot that police unions are doing behind the scenes that I don't think the average American is super well informed on. But when it comes to the actual threats to police on the streets this year, we did see that they had overwhelming deaths from COVID, much higher numbers of deaths among police than we've seen in the past. I don't know if they were vaccinated or not, who's to say, but I do think that
that might be important to know whether they were vaccinated, because all the government agencies were trying to make it mandatory to vaccinate.
We should be looking more into what's going on within their unions and within what the police are actually doing out in the streets. And as a whole, we saw that this was something that they were battling. I think it's interesting because we haven't seen, at least to my knowledge, those same kinds of statistics around people like nurses who are also working with the general public and have been exposed to COVID at higher numbers. So it's interesting. I would like to see somebody dig into the data, but I haven't really seen a full report yet.
Seems like it's become a more dangerous time for officers as well on the street. And almost on a daily basis, you find another story somewhere in the country. A law officer lost his life due to violence as well.
Well, that's because the police and cops have become a lot more violent on the citizens. And they're scared of their own shadow. And they're hiring people that shouldn't be cops, so they shoot first and ask questions later. You got a bunch of 100-pound women out there shooting people just because they're scared. And then they say it's justified because she was only a 100-pound woman.
Well, statistically, no. The deaths were not up based on actual violence in the streets for police. In fact, I think they maybe even dipped a little bit.
Good for her. They weren't up on the streets. They dipped.
As a whole, police officers in our country are actually pretty safe. We don't see a ton of deaths in the line of duty when it comes to actual, deaths that they incur while they're out policing the streets. What we have seen, again, has been traced back to COVID, which I think you could link to their work in the streets, but, we haven't specifically been able to say that yet or not. And then we also see a lot of issues with their health as a whole. Police in our country do not get especially the kinds of mental health care that they need. And I think that we need to spend more time talking about that, because if you've ever been exposed to seeing a dead body or to witnessing violence, you know that it impacts your brain and it impacts your life. It's not something that the average person is really meant to see or be able to grapple with. And when that happens, instead of actually giving them treatment, instead of giving them the actual health care that they need.
I totally disagree with this. We have plenty of medical. We have free medical when we're cops. And we can seek help. The problem is there's this negative stigma to seeking help, and then you're called kind of a pansy, and why are you going, and get over it, let's move on. Same thing they do with the vets. Our vets don't get the help. What are you trying to tell me that they think cops are seeing worse than our vets did in Afghanistan and Iraq? Come on.
And the ability to cope with some of those things. We actually often punish them if they even seek care, because we say it's a sign of mental weakness and they'll get put on desk duty. And so,
good point. This girl makes some good points.
They often don't even seek the resources that might be available to them because of those kinds of structures in our policing system. And I think it's hugely problematic as we learn more and more about the brain, as we learn more about mental health. We are increasingly understanding just how traumatic impacts the brain and how it can actually change the brain's functionality. And it can impact all kinds of other areas physically. It can cause high blood pressure. It can cause diabetes. It can cause all kinds of actual physical health issues when people aren't getting the mental health care they need, specifically after they have incurred trauma. And the reality is that police do incur trauma. And I think that that's something that we...
Not only do police incur trauma, they exact and enact and cause a lot of trauma on other people.
Need to focus on for anybody who says they support police. This should be high on our radar because right now we're doing them a huge disservice.
I don't support police. I support good police, and I think good police are far and few between because they aid and assist in hiding bad police. That's my problem.
And I think that oftentimes that ends up coming out in their work as well. You know, when somebody hasn't gotten the treatment they need and when they have trauma, they can be a bit more trigger happy. They can have PTSD that can cause actual interaction.
I agree with her there. They're definitely more trigger happy. I just don't know if it's from trauma. I think it's from weakness.
Actions with citizens to escalate needlessly. And so it's this effect that really spirals throughout the nature of policing in our country. And again, it's just not something we really talk about. And it's not something that there's a whole lot of resources going to.
And you do see in cities, too.
Not a lot of resources going to. They're raising taxes every year. Police department's budget has gone up every year since they existed. But there's not enough money. There's never enough money to fix all the problems caused by government.
It's interesting, the stats you just pointed out a minute ago about there's not been more violence, but a lot of police officers are leaving because they don't feel like cities have their back.
Okay, so this is more of the propaganda. Cops aren't leaving. There's no shortage of cops. Agencies are working with 50% manning, and you know what? The world isn't burning down. This is all propaganda. All the poor cops, we need to have their back. They've got limited immunity. They can't be sued. They have the same immunity as a judge and DAs. They cannot be sued in the course of their action, which means they're running around shooting people and they're not being held accountable. So don't tell me about how they don't have their back. They have a retirement. They have good medical. They get paid good. They can't be sued. They get limited immunity. And the DAs don't charge them when they do commit crimes. So don't feed me this crap about, oh, they don't have their back. They're leaving. We have to do something. BS.
Right. Well, and as a whole, nobody does have their backs. And I think that we've given them...
Oh, nobody has their back. Really? You and me as pesky citizens don't have limited immunity. We can be sued when we screw up. They can't. We can be sued if we shoot somebody. They can't.
Impossible task. And I want to be clear, I think there are a lot of problems with policing in this country that there should be some accountability on.
Good for her. Good for her.
That being said, the people who go into policing for the right reasons are quickly beaten out of the system. We ask them to enforce laws that should never be laws in the first place.
Great point. Cops are pressured to enforce BS, money-grabbing, taxing crap, and they don't say no, even though the Supreme Court said they have no duty to act.
We ask them to put their lives on the line.
No duty to act. Nobody asks an officer to put their lives on the line. No more than we ask the fire department to run into burning buildings aimlessly and get killed. Okay? That's just more propaganda.
To go after things that are not actual criminal activity. We see them consistently having to waste time doing things like policing people for marijuana, which is honestly just ridiculous. Meanwhile, they don't actually go out and solve real crimes. Our homicide clearance rate averages around 60% every year, and for other violent crimes, it's far less than that. And so we spend a ton of money and resources, and we put people's lives in danger, asking police to enforce all of these laws. And this is the problem with big government. When we talk about the problems with policing, we need to take it one step back and talk about the problems with big government and the legislatures that are putting these laws on the books in the first place.
Good for her. Too much government's never good. Too many laws. We have way, way, way too many laws. And the laws we have, guess what? The judges let them out and don't enforce them. The DAs don't charge on them. And you know what they do? We need more laws. That way we can have a whole bunch. It's kind of like if you go to an all-you-can-eat buffet and they go, hey, all we got is turkey. Everybody be like, man, why don't you have something else? Why don't you have a choice? Why can't, that way I can pick and choose. That's what government wants. They want to have a whole bunch of laws on their big feast of smorgasbords to get taxed, and then they get to pick and choose who they enforce those laws on.
That police then have to go out and be the ones to enforce. That creates division in our society.
They don't have to go out and enforce. No duty to act.
It creates animosity towards police, and it puts police in dangerous situations that they shouldn't be in. And I think that as a whole, we should have a policing system that functions more like the fire department. We call you when we need you. You come out. You actually provide care. You follow up. You solve the crime. Instead, we have them out here doing things like civil asset forfeiture, pulling people over for needless traffic infractions.
Hey, I like this girl. I missed part of her podcast this morning when I heard this. So that's why I wanted to come back, because I thought she sounded pretty good. Good for her.
We have them going out and, again, banging on people's doors over a plant. These things don't actually make any sense. They do make our society more dangerous, and they push good cops out of the field because good cops want to go in and help people, and good cops want to go in and actually uphold the Constitution. So often, our system does not let them do that.
She's pretty correct. I mean, it's not that it doesn't let you do it. It's very hard to do it. And when you go against the blue line, when you go against being a team player, when you stand up for things like the Constitution, you're looked at, oh, you're one of those. Oh, you're not a team player. Oh, we can't depend on you. Oh, let's have this big operation, but we're not going to call him because he's not a team player. That's the problem. That's how she's right about running out good cops, or the good cops just give up and said, screw it, I'll just go along to get along.
And when they try to be a whistleblower, when they try to raise the alarm, what happens? They actually get penalized by their unions, by the police departments. They're told to sit down and shut up. They're told not to turn in the bad officers who are out there causing them grief. And so they end up leaving and getting pushed out. And so there's problems all around. But I love that we're finally starting to address some of this, because I think for some time we've had the notion in this country that our policing still operates kind of like, Andy Griffith, the good old days. You've got this local county cop and he's out there doing good. And that's really not what's happening anymore. We have a huge, massive infrastructure. There's been a real weaponization of our police. We're asking them to function like the military in our streets. It violates our Constitution. It's not something that upholds civil liberty.
Man, this girl's talking my language. Who is this Hannah Cox? I like her.
And again, it's something that puts them in danger as well, and it pushes good people out of the field. We want to be attracting smart, good, hardworking, conscious people to this field. But right now, the incentive structure is just simply not there.
Anna Cox with Fox News with us on News Talk 820 WBAP. Anna, thank you so much for your time today.
Okay, I wanted to cover this because I thought it was interesting, and I thought she made some great points. And you know what? Everybody can take it for what it's worth. If you want to go record the whole thing without me, it's on WBAP Morning News, and I think the date is January 12th. All right, well, in that there,